All right. Hey, everyone, remote learners at home, or if you missed school today on Monday, welcome to our first full week of classes. And I'm going to try to get better at these, keeping these brief for you. But I do want to show you that we are still in the imperialism unit, and the plan is to finish that by the end of this week. Remember that we have a 3-day weekend coming up, and I want to keep on schedule. So, if you've been following, we're in the Imperialism Boot Camp. Last week we covered geography of colonization. And now today we want to cover the new imperialism and Scramble for Africa. So, our objectives here, first of all, we're going to define imperialism here in a minute. And then we want to be able to identify and describe the motives behind imperialism, of why it happens, as well as the effects it can have on a society. And probably the most important thing is we're going to build on that skill of critiquing primary and secondary sources of information. Really quick, primary source is it's coming directly from the source, straight from that person that experienced it. And then secondary source is typically an academic source. So like from your textbook, you have a historian who has studied historical events, and they are writing information about it or data about it. They weren't specifically there, so they're secondary. Versus primary means that person was directly there, witnessed the event, and it's straight from the source. So to direct you on where you need to go, I'm going to start off with the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go ahead and make this larger. In the PowerPoint, we started class today with a global map, and we brainstormed some ideas of these things, all these circled areas, something they may have in common. So some of the ideas we came up with in class was that maybe they had the same resources, spoke similar languages, that they're all near bodies of water. And those are accurate, but what I really wanted to get is they were all former colonies. So they were territories under the French colonial empire, meaning all of these regions at some point, France was the mother country, and they had full control as colonies over all of these other areas. And then we took that map, and we took the one from last week, looking at areas in the red here that seem to have lower levels of development in terms of literacy rates, life expectancies, GDP, and other things about their economy. And if you look, you can see that there's some overlap here with colonies under French rule, and those same areas today are struggling. So if you match those up, we learned last week that geography can affect the fate of a country or a whole continent, but also perhaps maybe colonization had something to do with it. So then the next thing we went into is we did a political cartoon analysis to we still haven't fully identified or described what imperialism is. So if we look at this cartoon, what we did is we practiced on what things in the cartoon do you recognize. So we recognized that there was a priest reading a booklet, and we looked at who else was represented. Obviously, we have Uncle Sam representing America. We have a native person who represented Hawaii, and then we had someone enforcing this wedding, this marriage that's going on here. And what this is this political cartoon is about the concept of Hawaii didn't become a U.S. state until 1961, I believe. Maybe it was 1954. Between 1954 and 1961 is when it became a state. Prior to that, it was a territory. And what we're learning is if you look, this isn't a Bible, it's actually an annexation policy. Annexation basically means when one item, one piece of territory is expanded upon. So ultimately, this cartoon was about the United States annexing Hawaii as a territory. So based on that, we did a quick little exercise where everyone came up with a definition for imperialism, or tried to define why it happens. So here's your actual definition here of imperialism. So you have it right in front of you. This is when a country extends its power over another one. So the most direct way is they colonize the territory, they gain the resources. Those are the most explicit things we see. But there's also some forms of direct control, meaning control over what the culture looks like, affecting their economy and their government. So the easiest example of that would be if we use the United States as an example. If we were colonized, we are a former colony, but if we were colonized now, let's say by Morocco, right, a country in Africa, the most direct thing is, what if they colonized our territory? That would mean right away that we now belong to Morocco and they could cultivate our resources. But the indirect part, let's say no longer are we dressing in a typical American style. Our language changes. We now have to adopt languages spoken in Morocco. Instead of learning about US history in our classes, we would learn about Moroccan history. Our whole society would change. That's kind of that direct consequence there. Then we went through the motives, and imperialism has three types of motives. And sometimes it can be more than one, but the point is that everything can be categorized into these three. So we have economic, which means that anytime resources are being used for value, that's going to fall with economic. Or if the mother country doing the colonizing, if they take over a nation and they take the resources and they sell them, again, that's an economic motivation. Or maybe the mother country is taking over an area as a colony to open up a new market. So let's say that the United States wants to start selling iPhones in the Ukraine. Well, if we annex the Ukraine or take over it, now we have an open market. So now we have another customer basically to sell our products to. That boosts our economic opportunities and prosperity, so that's an economic motive. Political would also be to expand your empire, to have all kinds of territory all over the world where your reach and influence is everywhere. And then finally, I briefly mentioned changing a culture to make it adopt the customs and rules or languages of the mother country. That's cultural motivation. We'll get more to that later in the week. At this point, you'll also, now we've defined imperialism, we've gotten to the motivations. At this point, you would want to go down below to the Scramble for Africa video that I won't play, but you can play that on your own. And as you're viewing it, you want to understand the outcome of the Berlin Conference, and then try to find out the motivations behind imperializing Africa in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Okay, next thing. I also used these as images to help represent the Berlin Conference. So long story short, European countries, including Belgium, Great Britain, France, Italy, Portugal, Spain, they got together and they carved out various territories of Africa, and they basically negotiated. Okay, well, the French, you'll get West Africa, Belgians, you'll get the Congo, and then and the British and so on, they divided this all up for the resources and trade routes and everything else available. And those regions then became under control of Belgium, Great Britain, and so on. So expanded European influence in Africa. This is further into that, so you can get an idea of how this continent was carved up into all these little pieces that don't belong to anyone in Africa at this point. So then at this point, what we wanted to do is we started looking at Congo. So some context here is to know that Congo holds a lot of the world's resources, both in the present and the past, and it made it a very attractive site for Belgium as they wanted to be able to extract all those resources. So now what I'd like to do is show you the next set of documents to help you out. You have sources here, documents A through E, in order to read a little bit more about the Congo. Again, modern day Africa, Central Africa, Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is right here. And you want to go through these sources, and what we have is we have 2 letters from King Leopold, who basically made himself the king of the Belgians. And he has 2 documents. He has a public document that gives some of his views on why Belgium's colonizing and acting in Congo. Then he has a more private letter. And what I'd urge you to do is look at the public letter and the private letter and see if you can distinguish any differences in tone and then also the language he uses and the motives he describes. And then further down, you also have now document C. Document C is a report where the British get a suspicion that King Leopold is doing some pretty insidious things in the Congo. And so they send down Robert Casement to do a report. And as you read this document, you'll see what's actually happening in the Congo, as well as your documents further here of document D and E. That'll give you more insight to what was actually happening to the Congolese people to help get an idea of what it was actually like. And the reason we analyze all of these sources is if we only analyzed one of them in class, you might only get a one-sided view of imperialism in Africa. But if we go through all of them, we can get the full-rounded view of what was actually happening, what it was actually like. So with that, the final thing you'll be doing, I know it seems like a lot, that's why we're giving you some additional time for this, is again, source analysis. You're going to apply this source analysis using the happy method, and you're going to use that on your source documents here, documents A through E. And you're also going to use it on another document that I'm going to show you here briefly. Let's see here. This is what I want to look at with you. Is this a political cartoon called In the Rubber Coils? And so this deals clearly with African imperialism of the specifically in the Congo by the Belgians. But we did this in class as a practice to get an idea and understanding of a political cartoon. So our historical context was that we're dealing with a time of imperialism in Central Africa. And this cartoon, we need to know who it was intended to reach and its purpose, and then also what we can learn from this document. So I would encourage you to spend some time with these discussion questions 1 through 5 and go through this as a practice, identifying items in the image. A quick hint, obviously the snake represents King Leopold, and then we have native Congolese people. That's the only hint I'm going to give you for now, because I want you to go through and actually analyze the source to see what meaning you can make. Then after that, the graded portion. is we're going to do our discussion post now that we've done a practice on source analysis and we've defined imperialism, we have its motivations, and we've done source analysis practice of both written and visual information. Now you're going to do a graded one in a discussion post. So to show you how to reach that, you're on the course page, and under the History Bootcamp Imperialism, we had today's lesson. We had the source analysis practice in the rubber coils. That was non-graded. And now we have the graded discussion post. So I've provided some background context of what is going on at the time with British imperialism to take a look at that. So I gave you some background on what's going on, but then I give you a cartoon to analyze here. And so then we're going to have the discussion post. So your resource is available. You can always download a larger version of the picture. The discussion questions highlighted here, these three, this is what I need you to respond to in your original discussion post. And you'll record that down here just in the discuss. You'll click new post. And then you'll type in your response. The due date for this, I'd like to see this ready by Wednesday so that we can get rolling on this. Have your original post ready by Wednesday for sure. And then don't forget you need to respond to at least one classmate. I would ask that you get that response done by Friday so that way we can look through this. For now, that's all I have. Keep an eye out. Office hours are always there for remote learning. I have an open Zoom meeting that is on the front page and also in the remote learning office hours for you to access. I hope you're doing okay. Hope things are going well at home and that you're getting everything you need. But if not, you can always reach me. You can call, you can email, and I hope everything's good, and we'll see you soon.